Unlike the NES and SNES, the Game Boy Advance was a system I grew up with, and beginning Link's Awakening, even if the original was created for Game Boy and DX for the Color, had a small element of coming home. To address the immediate question as to why I played DX over the newest remake or the original version, as I learned later, it felt not dissimilar to a complete edition of the original game as opposed to a full remake. That being said, I look forward to later completing the remake, although I might be getting a bit ahead of myself. Following A Link to the Past, the shoes this game had to fill were enormous, and Link's Awakening did a great job trying to complete an impossible task while also staking a claim as its own independent game. Welcome if you're new, and welcome back if you're not, to the great Legend of Zelda Marathon. This time, I want to start off with a quick thank you to anybody who has watched any of the previous 3 videos I made on the first 3 Legend of Zelda games. Everyone's positive comments have been more than kind, and I appreciate everyone who's been joining me on this journey so far, whether it be live or after the fact. If you're new here and haven't guessed, I'm attempting to play through the entire Zelda franchise entirely blind, and trying to collect every heart container to boot. A task that's quickly becoming near 95% plus completion blind runs as we continue through each game. In the past, I've only ever beaten Phantom Hourglass, having dropped most of the games I've attempted to play within the first 30 minutes, and as usual, I won't be going in every detail of this playthrough. There's over 30 hours of footage to compress into one video, but if you're interested in seeing the full playthrough, check out the link I just had pop up in the top right, or check the description for the VOD playlist. Coming off of A Link to the Past, I had high expectations again for its follow-up. The first thing I noticed was a return to the grid system more similar to the original games. Each screen was the size of that section of the map, with no scrolling along certain edges like you found in A Link to the Past. I actually quite enjoyed this system for the maps, as it allowed me to more easily focus on what's on screen at any given time, helping me not to miss out on heart pieces that cross the edges for a quick second before being lost to me again. In addition, it allows me to fight more complicated fights easier, with less focus being required on how the screen's moving. A Link to the Past did this for boss fights, but I appreciated it being everywhere now. And in addition, I really liked the new map. The new map system incentivized you to go check out every nook and cranny to discover what secrets Koholint Island may have had in store, revealing themselves only after I walked into that tile. While A Link to the Past wowed me with an incredibly large and quite pretty map, early on I felt more accomplishment uncovering each of these tiles of Koholint in Link's Awakening. And so my adventure began in Mabe Village, checking out what each person had to say and what each building had in store for me. I even found a new game to play. Okay, maybe it can't come close to matching the quality and expectation I have of the now famous shooting gallery. And so, disappointed as I was about the lack of a shooting gallery, I went off, exploring woods and caves, eventually stumbling on the ability to jump, an item I never could have predicted appearing and would lead me to falling off more ledges than ever before in attempts to skip around different stages of the world. I found myself using the jump frequently to find skips that I don't think were supposed to be there, jumping over 3 block gaps by trying to walk sideways while in the air. It worked sometimes. And, oh, what's this? We're collecting instruments in this game. That's exciting. I love instruments. My initial impressions of the game were that I liked it. It was definitely odd. Enemies had weird forms or attack patterns. I could jump across those gaps, sprint around. I was finding instruments instead of crystals. Some of the connections between areas felt a bit weird, and... is that a chain chomp? Oh, right, no, that was an enemy in A Link to the Past too. That's my bad. I sometimes get my wires crossed, and that is definitely a Goomba. And there were also Shy Guys. And even Kirby showed up? I obviously never came close, at least I don't think, to figuring out what the whole deal with Colent was until after it was spelled out for me by the game. But there were some really cool things to hint at the nature of the dream of Colent sprinkled throughout the game, not the least of which was the name of it itself. Link's Awakening. I probably should have seen this coming. Alas. For a series that, from what little I understand, focused on very limited stories that existed to further gameplay, it was surprisingly in-depth, at least the hints leading up to the game's big reveal. There were a few initial nitpicks I do have with the game, and that's mainly that it felt harder to traverse than its predecessor overall. The teleport zones were an interesting addition, but I definitely preferred A Link to the Past's bird. And maybe that's just my enjoyment of the puzzle that led up to being allowed to fast travel, but I definitely thought that they felt more generic than calling your bird friend to whisk you away to parts unknown. And some enemies were a lot less fun to fight. The vampire bat enemy in the one temple in particular drove me absolutely nuts. It frequently hid behind tiles my arrows couldn't pierce and ended up being frustrating to fight. The amount of times I fell off Eagle Tower trying to fight Evil Eagle was also frustrating, although at the end of the day, that was more my fault. But I'll never forget the fucking Punch-Out guy. His ability to knock you back to the entrance of the dungeon was, frankly, ludicrous and incredibly annoying. I felt there were multiple attempts I made where I didn't even get to start the fight in earnest before I was sent flying back to the beginning of the dungeon. Now, if you're a huge Link's Awakening fan, don't panic. I know I just let off with some negatives, but I promise it circles back to my main argument. Because even still, I appreciated what they tried with each of these bosses. It wasn't the same thing being rehashed over and over again. I didn't just see reskins of A Link to the Past's bosses pulled into Link's Awakening. There were bosses I had to jump over, a boss I played catch with, bosses who ran circles around me, and even Dopan, who, while I hated the bullshit, quote, hint he gives you to defeat him, I could appreciate the attempt at creating something different. Creating wildly different bosses than established, enjoyed ones is a risk, and while sometimes I didn't feel it made a full payoff, the times it did outnumber the times it didn't. And in doing so, they managed to avoid one of the major pitfalls I think many games and series seem to have. In rehashing the same boss over and over again, even if it's well liked, you run the risk of it becoming tired. So, creating something new, again, even if it doesn't quite work, still in my mind pays off better than attempting to see Wart or another Armos Knight. And even the level traversal, while sometimes a bit weird, was incredibly interesting. A Link to the Past, for all it did well, never had a dungeon as crazy as collapsing a tower in order to combine the upper and lower floors by destroying support beams. It never asked me to collect seashells in order to get a sword upgrade or drive around a raft on a rapids course to find treasure. While incredibly innovative in compared to the first two games, compared to Link's Awakening, parts of A Link to the Past almost felt safe. Link's Awakening could have easily rehashed A Link to the Past and been a very good game, but it didn't. There were risks taken and ideas had that I had never even considered possible. It wasn't until after I beat the game that I discovered if you had both an arrow and a bomb equipped and pressed both buttons simultaneously, you could fire bomb arrows. That's fucking genius. Like, that's a great idea, especially in the limitations of the hardware they were using. And I loved collecting the ocarina songs. Going out and trying to get one of the new songs from Marin or Mambo was exhilarating. I enjoyed trying to find what new song I could get and what new thing I'd be able to do with the music. I'm a big music fan, if this hasn't come off, pretty obvious at this point. And even in exploration, there were parts that were good and bad. I loved running around trading useless items up to more and more useful pieces, eventually managing to get a secret magnifying glass, allowing me to see invisible enemies and find the path through the windfish's egg. I loved the idea of getting my photo taken, especially with my buddy the Chain Chomp, who I frequently stopped by Mabe Village to see. But on the reverse side, hiding a heart piece in a random water tile that I had to dive into to find an emote that had no signal as to where it was questionable at best. And yes, I did manage to just get all the heart pieces in this game too, in case you're wondering. And the final boss, not to mention the whole fight sequence, felt like it furthered this line of thought to the extreme. The Shadows was a really cool boss fight, testing the player's mastery of all the items they now had and their ability to fight through different forms of bosses both old and new. Here's the rehash, although in a different way. something that took an established convention and turned it on its head. Meeting the Windfish after and the subsequent disappearance of Colin was also cool, with some really pretty sprite work, making great use of the Game Boy Color. And with that, though, Colin disappeared as quietly as it originally did appear. Link's Awakening was weird, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. It wasn't afraid to take risks just about anywhere, trying new things with a bold step forward wherever it could. I can appreciate a risk taken when attempting to do something like that. When I beat the game, I made the statement that I think Link's Awakening is the true spiritual sequel to the original Legend of Zelda, referencing the original Link to Link's Awakening mechanically. Get it? But I think that might have been a gross oversimplification in hindsight. It was obviously inspired by the first entry, but it attempted so much more than just trying to be another Zelda game. Instead of, Link, the princess is in trouble, you need to save her, take these crystals, pieces of the Triforce, whatever it may be, it was explore an island, collect instruments, and awaken basically like an elder being in order to wake up. That's really different. That's really interesting. That's really new. It's fresh. And I think that's why the series has been so interesting to play through so far. In a franchise where I felt like I regularly only heard about 5 games, I was expecting most of them to conform to the formula that those big name games laid out. I was expecting a series of Links to the Past, Ocarina of Times, Wind Wakers, Twilight Princesses, and Breath of the Wilds. And while the original 3 had their own unique flair, I don't think it was until I encountered the weirdness of Link's Awakening where I truly began to understand why this franchise has made it to 21 main entries and spanned nearly 40 years. If A Link to the Past is the game that satisfied the mechanical half of my brain, Link's Awakening scratched the itch of the creative side. Recently, I was talking to a friend of mine who also streams, please go check out Snake Lions, he's great, about the Yakuza franchise, and there'll be no spoilers, and I promise this is related. He made a comment that while he doesn't think that they're the greatest games ever, they are unapologetically Yakuza. Now, while I'll ignore the falsity that they aren't the greatest games ever created, I think that his comment actually translates well here. Link's Awakening is unapologetically a Legend of Zelda game. But Taylor, I hear you say, you just said that it wasn't like the older games. Thank you, Strawman. Usually you only come out during the streams. I don't mean that the games are specifically of the Legend of Zelda franchise. They embody what I think makes each of the Zelda games good. They're not afraid to come off of a rousing success, or sometimes failure, and completely change everything to try and create something innovative. And in that way, Link's Awakening could not have succeeded more. In a universe of, well, cinematic universes and series that oftentimes number high into the double digits at this point, it's sometimes a bit daunting to get into these types of games. What if halfway through you realize that maybe it's not for you? What if on the first game you realize that? I'll say from what little Final Fantasy I've played, I think that if you disliked some of the earlier Final Fantasies, you're in for a rough marathon. And I don't think that's the case with The Legend of Zelda. Each game has been unique enough to separate its own identity out from the series as a whole. I'm sure that there are people that prefer the 2D or the 3D games more than others. I know people that don't like Breath of the Wild, and that's fine. Preferences are real. You're allowed to choose what games you like. But I think it's a testament to the series that you have so many options. I think this can all be summed up with, I'm impressed. Very much so. As always, I'm playing through all these games live on my Twitch channel, KeysWizzle01, where I'm still playing through Majora's Mask because I now am getting a better schedule for making the videos. I'm live at 8 p.m. EST, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, sometimes Thursdays, and my Zelda days are Saturday and Sunday at the same time. If you've made it this far, consider watching my quest to collect all the masks in Majora's Mask. I still do not recognize the moon's existence, and I probably never will. Thank you again for your continued support, and I hope everyone's ready for Ocarina of Time coming soon. Hey, if you're here, do the YouTube things. They're nice, and I appreciate the positive or negative feedback. Thank you for the luxury of your time. Please remember to stay safe, stay healthy, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye for now.